Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of We Need to Talk. Today I am joined by activist, model, and storyteller, Miss Corey Rae. Corey, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
When I heard you speak at the Corey and I met at the Yahoo Allyship Pledge conference, and the minute I heard you speak, I was like, I have to have her on the show because there's just something about your presence that really, really spoke to me. And then even in doing more research on you and reading about you, you are just such a light, and I'm really excited to hear your story and have you share it with my listeners because I think that the work that you're doing is valuable, but I also think just what you represent is so beautiful. So I'm really, really honored that you're joining me.
Thank you for having me. That's so
Of
kind.
course, of course. Obviously my show is called We Need to Talk, and I think that in general, talking to people about their experiences and their journey, the quicker that we can gain a different perspective and come to understanding. And I think even in 2021, unfortunately, the trans community is still one of the most misunderstood and judged communities, and I think it's because people just don't take time to hear their stories and understand their experience. So I want to go back to the beginning with you, and I just want to know about your upbringing and how you came to know what your true identity was.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we are the most misunderstood, misrepresented, and unfortunately targeted. Of course, uh, Black women of transgender experience are the most targeted. I should say women of color of transgender experience really are the most targeted group of people, at least in the US, but I think around the world, to be honest with you. And there is a lot, I think, of just that people don't know. I believe the last study that was done, 79% of the population had never knowingly interacted with a person of trans experience. So
Wow.
there's questions, there's things that people just aren't aware of.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why there's so much misinformation out there is because people weren't growing up with the tools that they needed for so many things. How to be anti-racist, for
Yeah.
instance,
Yeah.
or were taught that racism was over. And look how long ago it was with this black and white photo of Martin Luther King Jr. Like, what? So, and of course, myself, I was a victim of that as well, of my education system. And I had even studied. I have a minor in the sociology of gender and sexuality.
Mm.
And in taking sociology courses, one of them I took was sociology of social class. And I learned firsthand about systemic racism, yet spent the next couple of years until this June thinking that it was kind of over.
Mm.
And I was sleeping on BLM, which so many people, of course, think that this is new, which of course
Yeah.
it's not. You know,
Right.
it started in around 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And
Mhm.
so, there's so much that people are just quiet on or don't have a full understanding on or don't think it's their responsibility to speak on. And I think that's where a lot of things come in with our community. And I'm going to say for you and for your listeners that I will most likely say of transgender experience and not trans man, trans woman, trans person, because that's very all encompassing.
Yeah. That's very
Very
important.
like, yeah. And so you would never hear cisgender actor Brad Pitt and cisgender actress Angelina Jolie are getting back together or whatever it is. But
Right.
you bet you'll hear trans actress Laverne Cox. So I will probably say of experience, and that's just the
The language you're choosing, and I love that. It's important. Language is super important, and that's I'm glad you brought that up because I almost wish that I hope that we can get to a point where you don't have to put that label on a person.
me
Yeah.
too, me too. And of course, and I assume that you identify as cisgender,
Yeah.
which means you identify with the sex assigned to you at birth.
Hmm.
Um, and we do have that now. We have
Yeah.
cisgender and transgender, but it's still labeling
Yeah.
and othering. And
Yeah.
I love to be in a world where we don't have these labels and we can just be, but I think we are pretty embedded on these categories. So for now,
That's
we
where we're gonna. Yeah. That's where we are. Yeah.
at least I can change that verbiage a
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
bit, like the experience part. But to get back to your question, I mean, I suppose my story
Yeah.
really starts with when I was born. My mom felt very differently with me than she did with my brother.
Mm.
Really thought I was going to be a girl, had the name Julie picked out, was very surprised that I was deemed as a boy by the doctors and really couldn't figure out a name for hours. And her best friend was like, well, what about Corey? Can't you see all the girls in high school being like, look at that hot babe Corey? My mom was like, yeah. So it was one, assume that I'd be hot, and two, that I'd be getting like some action. So he liked that, and they spelled it Cory. And a couple days later, she changed it to Corey. She said something
Mm.
about it didn't feel right. So there was always something. My mom also said like the hormones released at birth, which is very different. And she just knew, she always recalls going back to this moment of thinking something was very different about me and special. She actually uses the word special.
Mm.
And when I asked for a dress at the age of 2, she really didn't think anything of it. But so many instances like asking for Barbies and asking for a dress, she would go back to that moment giving birth to me and how different that felt. And she gave me the dresses and she gave me the Barbies. And my brother also painted his nails and had Cabbage Patch dolls, but my brother also loved South Park and trucks. And I liked a little bit of action figures and stuff too, but I was like, I loved Barbie. I loved pink. I loved putting on her makeup. I loved wearing dresses and I loved wearing heels. And like, that was just Corey. And I did that
Yeah.
from the age of 2 on. And when I moved to, we were a California family, but my mom, my then stepdad, and my brother and I moved to New Jersey. And it was there in a very different town, obviously, than
Yeah.
Los Angeles, where I realized I was way more different than I expected. I had heard comments a little bit while I was in California about like, why is your son playing dress up with my daughter? Or my kindergarten teacher, who was obsessed with my brother, who's 3 years older, told me I couldn't play dress up at recess. And my mom went in and she was like, do not ever tell my child what they can or cannot do in their free time. And so I always knew that she was going to be my fiercest protector, but I also always knew something was different about me and that
Yeah.
people weren't seeing, people were judging what I liked. And then in New Jersey, I realized it's because they were perceiving me as a boy. And I did not identify with being gay. I was like, I'm not a guy that likes a guy, but like, I feel like I'm one of the girls, and I couldn't understand it. And so when I was in middle school, I think it was right around my bar mitzvah. There was a mom that came in for career day, and every kid in the class got a different magazine and for her to show her advertisements in. And I had a People magazine, and inside was the story of a trans boy, a trans
Mm.
teenager. And I saw the word transgender, and the sentence that he had used was trapped in the wrong body. And I'm sitting in this class, and I'm like, oh my God, there's a word to describe how I feel. And until that moment, I thought I was the only person on planet Earth who felt the way I did.
Mm.
I was like, what is wrong with me? Why me? Like, what is going on here? And will anyone ever understand? And will I have to be a boy? Will I have to have sex? Will I have to get married? Like, all these things that I started to get anxiety about, which I should have my therapist tomorrow. And yeah, and so I found this term and I took it home and I read the article over and over for like 2 weeks. And I eventually showed it to my mom and I said, is this girl covering up for being a lesbian, or is this trans thing real? My mom had been waiting for me to say something because I was still kind of playing dress up, which in middle school you don't really do anymore. And she'd been waiting and she was like, no, this is real. And I was like, okay. I took it back to my room. And a couple nights later, I went down to my mom and I was like, I want to be a girl. She goes, okay. And I kind of told her about this fantasy land that I created in my mind. And probably from, I would say like 7, 8, 9 years old, I would come home from school and really pretend. I would replay the day in my head as if I was a girl. Or while I was in school, I'd be pretending I was a girl and like seeing how things would work out differently if I were how I perceived myself. And I told her all about this fantasy land. And I said, can I go to high school as a girl? And she goes, Corey, I have no idea. And it took her 3 something years to find information, to find a therapist who would see me. Most people that she spoke to would not see a child and now a teenager. And I found the term in 2006. And I was now 2008 or 2009 at this point, and 15, 16 years old. I think it was like 2000, I think it was 2009 when I really started to transition.
Mhm.
And I kind of just slowly started. My mom said to you, I went to this Halloween dance, and long story short, all my friends were making out with boys that I had crushes on, and they didn't know I wanted to be a girl. And it was one of the worst nights of my life. And I was young for my grade, an incredibly late bloomer. So I was already a junior in high school. And my mom was like, "Do you want to start wearing my clothes?" And I said, "Okay." And she gave me her tops to wear and her jeans, which we have. I'm tall and lankier, and she's shorter with like an hourglass figure. So her clothes really looked androgynous on me, and people didn't really understand what was going on. But as my hair grew out, they were like, "Oh, Corey must be out as gay because Corey's hair is long," which is like, what?
Yeah.
And and so she eventually in the winter time found a therapist who would see me, and she said, "Yes, you are transgender." And I don't know, the terminology was used back then, and a lot of new terminology these days. And it's 12 years ago, something like that. So we started therapy, and she said, "I'm going to put you on hormone blockers. You're lucky enough where you're just starting to go through through puberty." And so I went on those hormone blockers, and then a year later, I went on estrogen. And by the time I graduated, I had transitioned in the sense of hormones, and in the physical sense, I had grown out my hair, and I was on estrogen, and I was passing, or now we say cis assumed, um, where people wouldn't have known walking down the street if I were what I was, and they assumed I was a girl,
Mhm.
which I am. And so I decided to live stealth going off to college. Oh, and of course, I won prom queen, which is like,
Awesome. Yeah, I saw you were the world's first transgender prom queen. That's amazing. Congrats on that.
uh,
How cool.
so that happened too, which was awesome. And I think we told the school, like, please don't let any papers write anything about this. Like, Corey wants to go off to college and live this normal life. And I did just that. And I had surgery, gender affirming surgery. We used to call it sexual reassignment surgery. The
Oh,
day
I
of,
love that change. I love
yeah,
that
me
change.
too, me
It's
too.
beautiful.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
much, like, even passing is now cis assumed, and there's so much great terminology coming out, like me saying I've a transgender experience, and
Yeah.
it's and preferred pronouns. I learned this week it's not something to say anymore. Now it's just, what are your pronouns?
Yeah.
Preferred means that there's something else there, and like, no, my pronouns are she her, which
Yeah.
I still am like uncomfortable when people ask that because I'm not used to people asking that question.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I lived this life for 5 years, 4 years of college, and 1 year after, where I was cis assumed and I lived stealth and I didn't disclose. And then Caitlyn came out, and there was this shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida in June 2016. And 2 weeks later, I decided to take what I was going to write as a book and take the website that I was creating for Model Portfolio and mesh them together and create a blog post.
Hmm.
And I called that Allow Me to Reintroduce Myself. And that was my coming out to the world. And I basically told all my exes and all my friends and everyone I'd ever worked with and gone to school with since high school that I was trans and I had transitioned. And I was not expecting it to, but it went viral. And overnight, I was put in this role of an activist and a writer for the community. And I hadn't really been modeling yet. So that's kind of where I got to here, where I then moved to Los Angeles with something in mind of helping the world see people of transgender experience in a different light, that
Hmm.
we can be supported, that we can be
Yeah.
happy, that we can be young, that we can be beautiful, that we can get the crown and the guy. So that's what's really brought me here to you.
That is so beautiful. I mean, I like have chills and emotional listening to your story. But I think a couple of things that stood out to me was that your mom from the beginning was so supportive. I mean, that brings tears to my eyes because I know so many people of the trans experience that don't have that support. So you are so blessed to have had that.
Absolutely. And I walk around this world, I will admit, with seemingly the most privilege. I'm white, I'm blonde, I'm, well spoken,
Yeah.
and I also had support.
Yeah.
I am what society has deemed as beautiful. I'm smaller framed, all these things that go into what it means to be passable or cis assumed.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't have 100% uh, privilege because of this experience of being trans, but I mean, I'm pretty close and I walk
Yeah.
around that and I acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But I also feel that because of that, it is my job to make sure that there is no passable. There is no standard. People all the time are like, I want to look like you, or I wish. I'm like, don't. Because I don't want you to feel that you have to get facial feminization. If you want that, it's great. And if you are doing it out of safety, yes. But I want you to feel comfortable how you feel. We shouldn't
Right.
act, walk, talk, be anything. And that goes for women,
Yeah.
period,
Yeah.
of trans or cis experience. We do not need to conform to what society says women need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to use this privilege, so to speak, for a good reason. And my mom is the reason why I am here,
Yeah.
literally, but also, she has been there for me. And I am very lucky for that. And that also adds to the privilege of having a support system. And unfortunately, not every person of trans experience will have that.
Yeah.
And there needs to be places digitally and in person that we can go with each other. And Clubhouse is an amazing thing.
Yes.
Are you
Yes.
on
Oh
Clubhouse?
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I've seen you on
No.
Clubhouse. I feel like we've been in we've
I think
definitely
we've
been
been
in
in a
this.
room together. Yeah. Where I think I was listening to one that you were talking in. Yeah.
Yes. And so that's a great space.
Absolutely.
Called Trans Talk, which is about like creating the safe space for cisgender people to show their support and ask these questions, as well as trans people to share their stories and feel support. We need to start creating these spaces
Mm-hmm.
that we can all connect and bridge that 79% gap
Yeah.
in the same room.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you did your allow me to reintroduce myself blog, did you get any negative feedback from people that felt like you had lied to them?
Great question. We just talked about this in the room today on Clubhouse. On my blog, no. On my social, no. On Yahoo. So Yahoo had reposted the article and then did a follow-up interview with me. That's how it kind of got the virality.
Gotcha.
And I did read their comments on that post. And I didn't read them right away. I read them months later or something like that.
Even though we know, don't read the comments.
Yes. And a lot of like, get AIDS and die, or your mom, this, that, and the other, shame on them, horrible things.
Yeah.
Truly does not affect me. I don't know why those hate comments actually, I don't know why. Everyone always asks me that. It doesn't bother me. I think it says more about them than myself.
Absolutely.
But yes, a little bit in the regard of personal people who knew me, and not just people on the internet hiding behind a screen. No. The only thing I got was a message from someone else, a girl who, she was kind of shady herself in college. And she was like, by the way, boys in this ex-frat that you made out with, multiple of them, they're going to message you something. And I was like, okay. And they never messaged me,
Right.
by the way. And on top of that, I got a lot of support from exes. My boyfriend that I had in college, who we actually, like, this is my 6-year anniversary of us breaking up, which is a little wild to think about that. Or the fact that I even think about that. Well, Time Hop reminded me, I'm going to be honest.
Time hop is like a good thing and a really bad thing sometimes.
Yeah. So I got from him, which I did tell him a couple months before I came out with the blog, and he was like, Corey, that doesn't change anything. Like, I think you're beautiful, and like, I, loved you for who you are. On the other side of it, I had a Dutch boyfriend when I studied abroad in Amsterdam, where I got this minor in sociology, and he had thought that I was transitioning to a man. He didn't get it. And I was like, no, like, I have transitioned already. Right. He's like, oh, I wish you would have told me that. I would have been so proud of you. A lot of that was, I think some guys were scared. Some guys felt a little deceived. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I think there was an ease about it, and like, something about it was okay, because I did write a follow-up post, and my second post was sorry, not sorry, or I'm not sorry, or whatever the Beyonce song was. And yeah, so I had written a post about I explained to people why I didn't close, and it was because of safety and stuff like that. There was understanding.
I know that for a lot of people of color, when you're doing anti-racism work, it becomes a lot of emotional labor, feeling like you're always having to educate white people on racism and microaggressions and all of this stuff. And I personally have not gotten worn down by it because I really do pride myself on educating people and having those conversations. But have you ever gotten to the point where you feel a little exhausted, or feel like, the intolerance of other human beings can just be really debilitating for you personally?
Great question again. Um, yes and no. I have indirectly made it my career to make people feel comfortable around the transgender community and to answer those questions. It's part of my room on Clubhouse on Tuesdays. I call it Trans Talk, a safe space, so that these cis people can come and ask these questions they're afraid to ask. Because I don't mind. I mind when I'm dating.
Mm,
And I didn't realize that for a long time. And
mm,
I almost enjoyed explaining it to dates. And then I realized even if they were accepted, they kind of backed away because I threw information down their esophagus. And 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 so I have been trying to find a fine line and a balance.
yeah.
Also, because of living stealth and of saying trans experience, my transness isn't everything about me. And so it's hard because I've made my career about my life and making it okay for people to not come correct and then leaving correct.
Hmm.
But also, it's hard because it's just a part of my life and it feels ever consuming in
Yeah.
a lot of days. And for instance, social media, I know that I am going to do well when I post about my story. I don't want to post about my story. Well, if I don't post about my story every day, and if I don't post in general every day, then Instagram gets mad at me and they don't put out my post. And that means I can't make money.
Yeah.
Um, so that's where it's frustrating because it is the brand, but then again, it's not
Yeah.
personally. Like my therapist once, who transitioned me, once stopped and she was like, in the session, she's like, I totally just forgot that you were trans for a second. Sorry. Like it's just not everything about me. And
Right.
some people it is. I love that. I love that for them. It's just not my identifier. And in the other side of it, again, circling back to the dating aspect, I want a guy to come, as I say, correct and come educated and open to learning more. Of course, they can't know everything. I don't even know everything about being trans. I'm learning every day, quite
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
But to coming from a place where they're going to love me even more for the journey that I've been on, and I don't need to educate. For instance, I started dating a friend who he's been a friend for 2 years, and he's lovely, and we've always had something between us. And I've seen him through a couple girls. He's pretended to be my boyfriend at a bar to make a guy he's up with jealous. Like, we're friends.
Yeah.
And recently he hired me to be on his music video. And over the course of the fittings, which were a couple months long of prepping for the music video, he, because of COVID and stuff,
Mhm.
he and I realized that we both really liked each other. And he went to someone who was involved in the project, who was gender nonconforming, and said, if I were to ever like make a step further with Corey, how does her body work? How would I be able to pleasure her? How does this process work? And that was the biggest level up I've had thus far. And I
Mm.
feel like since my ex in college, when I told him, it went down for a while, and then I've leveled up with each guy. And sometimes it goes three down and like four up, five up.
Right. Right. Right.
I've done this thing of like leveling up with dating where they've come more correct each time and more accepting and less fetishizing, less kinking, less experimenting, less checking it off a bucket list. Oh, this is a beautiful trans girl. Let me fuck her because that's
Yeah.
the hottest trans person I've seen.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
it's so fucking, I get the compliment, but it's also offensive when you say you're beautiful.
I mean, I've had that experience in the past with as a black female, for sure. For sure.
I'm sure you do. And it's so interesting how we can probably find so many similarities. Like we're so seemingly different, yet we have, I'm sure, gone through very similar
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah.
And and I love that because it means that more than just trans people can understand our experience.
Yeah.
But also in the terms of dating, like I am still finding that line for myself. And I think it just comes with these guys coming correct. That's the word of the day. And,
Yeah.
or the phrase of the day, and being ready for
Yeah.
me.
So
So
in
yeah,
your
I do find it exhausting sometimes.
right. You're like, long story short. No, for sure, for sure. But like, within your education that you do, what do you feel like has been one of the most common questions or curiosities from cisgender people when you are educating them?
One that I used to get all the time was, do you get a period? Which boggles my mind. I guess that's a fair question, but that's a big one.
Oh,
And
really?
I don't, obviously, or maybe not so obviously. I don't menstruate. I cannot get pregnant, which is my one sad thing, though, is that, like,
Yeah.
of course, I wish I would be able to feel what it would be like to grow and cook a baby in my belly,
Yeah.
and have my partner be able to rest their head on my belly, and my family and my cousin who's only 5 months older than me. She just gave birth. So like I watched our whole family like love up on the belly, and that made me sad. But cis women can't do that sometimes,
Yeah.
more frequently than we think.
Yeah. Very
I
true.
have come to terms with that over the years. I still allow myself and give myself that grace and softness to feel sad about it, because it does suck.
Yeah.
But again, I could have been cis. And I think I have a theory that if I were born cis, I would be the worst person on planet Earth, like just an entitled, ruthless bitch. Nothing to humble me,
Right. Right. Right.
and maybe that would have been my thing. Who knows? And maybe it was in a past life. I don't know. But I'm sorry, what was the question? I just
Just the most common questions. So you said
Oh,
most
yeah,
people ask, like, do you get a period? Are there any other common
yeah.
questions that people ask?
Got on a tangent there.
Yeah, no, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah, I think that, and more of like, people are curious about scary situations. People are very curious with me about dating. Um, and I get questions about that. Like, even my guy friends, it's so interesting. I never had guy friends, like a group of guy friends.
Mm,
And I live here in LA, which is the guy from the music video. Like, he's part of those guy friends. Like, I walk into them, I walk into a party, they pick me up and swing me around. They're like, Corey, like, I never got that in high
mhm.
school. So I loved that. But even my guy friends sometimes will be like my one friend, I love him so much. And he himself is very sexually progressive. And he was like, so you, something along the lines of like, are the guys you date straight, or something like that? And as sweet and amazing of a guy he is, he didn't even know, like, do I date straight guys or gay guys?
Mm, mm.
There is still that embedded homophobia.
Yeah.
I love him. He's one of my greatest guy friends, and I know that he comes from a good place. And he also knows that I will shut him down real fucking quick when he asks questions like that.
Right.
So that's where I get it. Like,
Yeah.
what kind of guys do you date, or are they okay with it? Things like that.
Mhm.
And those questions are of like, what are your experiences with dating? Have you had any scary experiences? And also, what is it like to have sex?
Mm.
That is the key one, and it's different for all women of transgender, all people.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Plain, no vagina, no penis, excuse me, the same. So that's a lot of the questions that I get. Like, what is sex life? And for me, it's wonderful. I can't say that for everyone.
Right.
I went to a wonderful surgeon. Her name's Dr. Christine McGinn. And she is one of the three people I say saved my life: my mom, my therapist, and Dr. McGinn. And I am able to like self lubricate, and I'm able to like get, because I can get wet on my own, like sex is a little bit easier for me.
Mm.
I don't necessarily have to dilate right before sex. And for dilation, if no one knows what that is, it's after, if you so choose to get surgery. Some people are non-op. That's a term that we're learning now. Like, it's not just pre-op or post-op, but
Mhm.
non-operative.
Mhm.
If you are non-operative, or if you are post-operative, and you've decided to get that gender affirming care, dilation are like 4 hard plastic dildo-y shaped things that keep the depth and the width of your vagina for the rest of your life, because an anal vagina can actually collapse, and turn inside out like a sock, which is wild. But especially right in the beginning of after surgery, like keeps that depth and keeps the width with 4 different sizes. And you do that a lot for the first year, and then it's like once or twice a week for the rest of your life, or you
Mm-hmm.
have sex. For me, I don't need to dilate right before sex. A lot of trans women do need to dilate right before sex to open that up. Or, for me, it's easy. I can't
Yeah.
speak for everyone, but that's a lot of like the questions: dating, sex, experiences, stuff like that.
Interesting. But yeah, I can see how that would get exhausting to always have to explain. Um, I do want to backtrack a little bit because I want to talk about how you as an ally have managed to kind of include intersectionality in your work, because we have, touched up how Black trans women specifically probably are more attacked, more targeted than any other group. So what do you do in your work to kind of bring and shine a light on that specifically?
To be honest with you, there is not one conversation that I have that has to do with transness that I do not bring up women of color. It is I feel it is my duty. Oh, I get emotional thinking about it. Like, I think it's my responsibility as a person to like stand up for other people. And because I walk around with so much privilege, I know what could have happened to me. And so I find myself always talking about women of color because what happens to them is horrible. And and scary to think like that could be me. And so what I do is I try to seamlessly add that into my conversations on a daily basis to
Yeah.
let people know, because a lot of people aren't aware of that. I also do I do personally a lot of like charity volunteering work. Before the pandemic hit, I was volunteering a lot of time at the LGBT Center here in Los Angeles. One of my favorite days in LA was during Pride Month. The LGBT Center put on a trans pride, and I came and I helped predominantly trans women of color with choosing out. I donated, oh God, I don't even know how much clothes I donated, but there was a room full, like this room times 2, full of clothes that people had donated. And I helped dress people and pick out outfits for them. And that was like so lovely. And it's those smaller experiences and bringing it up in like everyday life that I have found with my activism work, doing things like the allyship pledge, the Yahoo allyship pledge, and putting people on my platform as well. Like, I would love to do an Instagram live with you,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? Like, I have to use my platform for good as well. And like, I made a statement when Black Lives Matter. I mean, when BLM happened in June, on my Instagram of like Black Lives Matter, and I noticed a lot of performativity with that and people taking it away. Like, it is still in my Instagram bio, and that in myself, I feel like I'm doing my duty of like, I am making that statement forever. That's not going away from my profile. Like, I'm going to keep that black square up. I took down the hashtag. I'm keeping that black square up to show that I'm showing up support in the least that I could do.
Yeah.
Taking the pledge, having people on my platform, bringing it up in everyday language. I do bring back the trans experience in most of what I talk about. And also something I like talking about more recently is how, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, is that mental health isn't talked enough in the community, in
It's
the Black communities,
it's not. Yeah.
especially of
Yeah.
people, of course, of transgender experience, because there's an added bit of the mental health aspect.
Yeah.
But I mean, look at Kanye West,
Yeah.
a genius
Yeah.
who has mental health issues is the worst word to use, but you know what I mean
Yeah,
when I
absolutely. I know
uh,
that's probably one of the terminologies I'm like, how can we change that? Because I don't want to call it an issue. I totally agree with you.
uh, who who has an experience with mental health
Mm.
and is now losing his family.
Yeah.
I think there's also some stuff with maybe him not wanting the help. but
Right.
that's another topic of the conversation.
For sure. For sure.
And I think it's, for me, verbalizing, because that's like what I do best, is talking and using my social platforms. I, of course, cannot go and volunteer anymore. I cannot, go and speak at Lululemon headquarters right now. I cannot go and speak at the Makers Conference right now.
Hmm.
But what I can do as of recent is like using my social platform, talking on Clubhouse, going on podcasts, discussing it with people, and like hoping that it makes some sort of impact.
Yeah.
That's where I bring it into my world.
Hmm.
I'm also doing two um, non-paid partnerships. One with a company called Consciously Unbiased.
Hmm.
Other, let me pull it up because I would love for people to know. Okay, so it's called End It Movement, which shines a lot about like slavery and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And Consciously Unbiased, two things that I'm partnering up with on social media to
Hmm.
talk about struggles that
Yeah.
the people of
Yeah.
colors community face. People of colors community. That's not right. Community of
Community of color. Communities of color. Yeah.
community of color. Um, yeah. So that's kind of how I brought it together for me.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you are using your platform. And I think that people think that may not be enough if that's all they have, but that's a place where you start. You have to start somewhere. So it's about those small steps. I think people think that in order to be an ally, in order to be an activist, you have to be doing these grandiose moves and making these huge steps, but it really just starts small. And I wish more people realize that, because I think we would have a lot more people trying to get involved if they knew that even the small steps do make a big difference.
And I say that a lot with people who ask how to be better allies to people of trans experience. And I'm like, I don't think you realize, by you like wanting to show up and by you checking in and being their friend or being their support, like that means more than anything that you can do. And then the added bonus is social media and sharing our stories and
Yeah.
saving stories and sending them to friends and putting them on your story and liking and commenting. And like that is really helpful, that social media aspect. And I do feel like I was policed a lot, predominantly by Caucasian people during the beginning of the movement. And I felt that I was not doing enough, even though I didn't share everything. I didn't tell people the money I was donating, money that I didn't have at the time. I didn't talk about the charities that I was working with, because I felt talking about it in a larger sense was very performative, grandiose screenshots of what you donated to, and like that for me didn't feel authentic, and it didn't make me feel comfortable. And I think that what I learned is that there's no one way of activism, and not just about a topic, but there's no one way of activism for the trans community.
Yeah.
For oh God, not color.
Communities of color.
Thank you. I was about to say something really not okay. A community of color. There's not one way of doing that activism, as long as you're doing something.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
what matters.
Absolutely. Well, Corey, I just think you are such a beautiful human. I love everything that you're doing. Absolutely. Please let my listeners know where they can follow you and continue to follow the work that you're doing in your story.
Okay. And I feel the same about you, truly.
Thank you.
And I do feel like we connected, more than I've connected with other people through the pledge and all
Oh,
of
thank
that.
you.
I can be found on Instagram at I'm Corey Rae, and Twitter at I'm Corey Rae, on TikTok at Just Corey Rae, on Clubhouse at Corey Rae, the socials, and of course CoreyRae.com, which I am relaunching for the 5-year anniversary, which I'm really excited about. And it'll be more interactive, more of a place for resources for people, and a safe space for people to find out more information. So all things Corey Rae, I suppose, on socials and the internet, you can find me.
Keep it simple. I love it. Well, thank you again so much for joining me. And to the listeners, make sure you subscribe to We Need to Talk, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
Thank you.